Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening around the world. Thank you for joining us for today's session, The Impact of Generative Artificial Intelligence in Online Learning Platforms, presented by our special guest, Professor Unnati Narang, Assistant Professor and John M. Jones Fellow of Marketing and the R.C. Evans Data Analytics Scholar at Gies College of Business, University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. My name is Alexander. I'm a part of the higher education team here at Exec, and I'll be helping to moderate today's session. Before we begin, I have a few brief housekeeping items for our audience. First, all attendees are in listen-only mode. However, we encourage you to engage in the session by asking questions, which you can do using the question box in your GoToWebinar control panel. Please make sure to use this feature for all the questions you may have for the presenters and any other comments or feedbacks you would like to share. We'll have a formal Q&A session, so please feel free to send in your questions throughout the session. Additionally, as you may know from our past experiences, we are recording today's session, so you can look forward to receiving a copy of the recording via email in the coming days. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce to you Kate Deering, Assistant Director, Recruitment and Admissions for Gies Graduate Programs Online. Kate?
Thanks, Alexander. Hello, and welcome to our Ivy Exec webinar today. My name is Kate Deering. I'm an Assistant Director within the Recruitment and Admissions space at Gies Online Programs with the University of Illinois. And I look forward to spending the next hour or so with you. Since our presenter works within Gies College of Business, I wanted to give you just a brief overview of what Gies Online Programs is all about. We offer 3 online master's degree programs, a Master's of Business Administration, a Master's in Accountancy, and a Master's of Science in Management, as well as 11 brand new graduate certificates that actually combine 12 credit hours of transcript credit in topics like strategic leadership and management, accounting, data analytics, or something like entrepreneurship and strategic innovation. Gies graduate level programs are innovative, they're affordable, and they're designed to be specifically online to offer flexibility and access for full-time working professionals. Today, we are very excited that you are going to experience a presentation from one of our talented instructors and be able to get a glimpse into what kind of content and research is happening within Gies. Our graduate courses balance foundational material shared on the Coursera platform with interactive high engagement components from Illinois. The high engagement components include a live class each week and many other facets to learning like group projects, faculty office hours, networking, and also just being part of a great university like Illinois. If you'd like to learn more, feel free to email us at giesonline@illinois.edu. Now, I'm very excited for our presentation today. As Alexander said, the impact of generative artificial intelligence in online learning platforms. Our speaker today is Unnati Narang, Assistant Professor and John M. Jones Fellow of Marketing and the R.C. Evans Data Analytics Scholar at Gies College of Business, University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Her research lies at the intersection of mobile marketing, consumer mobility, and engagement in digital environments. Her research examines, examines how consumers' use of mobile apps affects their behaviors in online and offline retail stores. In addition to mobile apps, she also studies user engagement in online learning platforms. She was awarded the 2022 AMA SIG Retail and Pricing, Emerging Scholar, and Best Doctoral Student Awards, the 2019 Matthew Joseph Emerging Scholar Award, the 2019 PDMA Emerging Scholar Award, the 2019 Mays Business School Outstanding Doctoral Student Award for Research, the 2018 Shankar Spiegel Best Dissertation Proposal Award, and was the finalist for the EMAC AI Mark Doctoral Dissertation Award in 2021. Unnati currently teaches MBA 564, which is Data Analytics Applications in Business in the Gies IMBA program. We're very excited to turn this over to Unnati Narang.
Thank you so much, Kate, for that kind introduction. I'm very excited to be here as well and talk about some of my latest brand new research really that has developed within the last 1 year or so. So I'm very thrilled to be here, and I'm excited to see where this conversation goes. So I'm going to begin sharing my screen and share the plan for today's webinar with all of you and dive right in. So the talk that I'm going to give today is going to focus on one stream of work, which, as Kate mentioned, deals with user engagement in online learning platforms, particularly thinking about how can recent advances in generative AI be used for enhancing user engagement. And I'm going to show you some data from some of the research that I've been doing here at GEES, and also generally talk about some of the issues as well as opportunities of AI as we are seeing. So the agenda for today is going to be three things. We're going to start off with some quick intros. Then we're going to dive deeper into this background and context of generative AI, particularly in the context of digital platforms. And when I say digital platforms, I'm going to take a deeper dive then into online learning platforms such as Coursera or even Yellowdig. Some of you may be familiar with those platforms. If not, don't worry, I will go through it step by step. And we're going to start with this world of human only, the world we've known for many, many, many decades. And in this human only world too, there is opportunity for creating engagement through content sharing. So I'm going to briefly discuss some of the work I've done on that. The second thing that we're going to talk about is then how can we use generative AI to create more content creation, content engagement. And I'm going to show you some results from a study that I've been doing, where what we find by analyzing data from almost 1,000 learners over their 13,000 posts and comments in online learning programs, which shows that even though AI is really good for generating more content, it's actually diminishing engagement. And then I'm going to explain why that is. Finally, I'm going to end with this third part where we're not only using AI and human intervention, but really trying to combine the two. And this is the idea of augmenting AI with human input. And maybe I'll offer you a strategy, a way that I can demonstrate how we can arrest some of the negative effects of AI on engagement by using that more of a hybrid modified AI approach. And then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. But again, as Alexander pointed out, if you guys have questions along the way, feel free to post it in the question forum that you have on your panel, and we would be happy to take them as we go along as well. Okay, perfect. So quick introductions. I think Kate did a great job already. I got my PhD from Texas A&M University in 2020. I studied quantitative marketing, and I've been at GEES since 2020. Mostly my decade of research has been about how do new technologies impact firms and consumers. Particularly, I've been interested in mobile marketing as well as digital platforms, specifically online learning platforms. And in addition, I use big data analytics. I also teach analytics related courses in my MBA program. But the interesting part here that I want to highlight from my background is that I didn't have a very linear career trajectory. I worked in retail as an entrepreneur for a few years. Then I actually joined a startup which was at the forefront of developing online learning content together with Columbia Business School Exec back in the early days of online education. And I think that played a huge role in how I see both the delivery of online content as well as research around it. Because at that time, online education was just starting. MOOCs had just kind of broken into the world. And at the same time, there was a huge amount of skepticism about how much is their potential going to be. Is this going to be a true disruptor in higher education, for example? And there was a fair amount of concern, which continues to remain so, at least in the MOOC setting, where learning is much more self-paced. There is a concern about what are the completion rates going to be? When learners start a course, how do we get them to the finish line if that's their goal? So I think this setting really challenged me into exploring more and more about how can we create engagement in digital platforms. And fast forward 10 years, I'm now teaching in our IMBA program. I want to introduce to you the kind of diverse learners we get in this program, which I've been told mirrors the kind of audience we have in this webinar today. So we get executives from Google. A typical course that I teach would have tech industry represented, finance, consulting. And what I see common across all these industries is they're all being disrupted by AI in some way or the other. And if you think about the demographics too, we get all kinds of diverse experiences, mostly mid-level, higher-level management, 10+ years of experience, average age of 36 to 39, depending on the course. This is data from my data visualization course that I just finished teaching. And we also have learners who are diverse in terms of gender and internationally where they're joining us from. So this really helps set up. I wanted to show you these two slides to give you some appreciation for the kind of peers you can be expected to be surrounded with and how the AI-related conversations we're having today may be relevant from that perspective. Okay, so the second thing that I want to get into now is actually give you some context of why are we talking about generative AI? Why are we talking about it now? Because as we know, artificial intelligence, broadly defined, so if you take a very broad stance on artificial intelligence, you can think of it as any prediction technology that reduces the cost of making a prediction. And this is definition that I draw from one of my favorite books. It's called Prediction Machines. So one of the goals today in the webinar will be I'll give you a ton of resources. I've actually set up a box folder that I'll give you a QR code to with a ton of resources and articles you can explore, because there's no way within 45 minutes I can cover this expansive topic. So the book that I'm talking about, Prediction Machines, is written by economists, and they really construe artificial intelligence broadly as anything that can reduce the cost of making a prediction. And that's really powerful because that can help you make decisions, particularly under uncertainty. So when we start looking at generative AI from that lens, you can think of it as reducing the cost of predicting the next text, the next image, and so on. But in today's talk, I've kind of talked about two things so far. One is this issue of engagement in online platforms. The second is generative AI. What I want to clarify up front is that for today's presentation, I'm going to be taking a platform first perspective. We know that the online content market is already pretty well established. It's actually hard to include all the numbers here. We know knowledge communities are growing, online learning platforms are growing, review platforms like TripAdvisor, Yelp, those are growing with people writing reviews and other types of user-generated content. So given that setting, as this more kind of recent innovation falls in the hands of users and consumers, becomes more publicly accessible. We all know ChatGPT has grown phenomenally just in the last 1 year. Even though it's still small right now, the growth potential has been tremendous. So if you just look at how many days it took a technology like ChatGPT to reach 1 million user mark, it was only 5 days relative to some of the larger platforms that we know and see today. Furthermore, the powerful nature of these large language models is their ability to generate content, which may be text. Now we're seeing audio, video, we're seeing images through DALL-E, Midjourney. So the potential to be able to generate very human-like content, which reduces, again, going back to our definition, reduces the cost of prediction, is very powerful. And further, it's disrupting many industries. Of course, there are always debates around automation and job security, but also it's touching many different industries, from healthcare to even military and war, which is very top of mind, unfortunately, these days. So we're seeing generative AI have this tremendous impact. More and more applications are being built using generative AI. So if you think about potential growth pathways, just in the next 2 or 3 years, it's at least going to hit the $143 billion mark. But I've even seen reports which are predicting, $700 billion in terms of the overall potential worldwide of applications based on generative AI. So we're really predicting very fast growth, unprecedented growth just in the next few years. And so what we can do is really evaluate the risks and potential opportunities of generative AI, but we have to be specific to the context. Something I may tell you that may work for cancer research, for example, may not work when we talk about engagement in online platforms, which is a very different setting. So being more context specific is always a good idea. And this happens anytime there's a new innovation, or it doesn't even have to be new, right? ChatGPT is based on transformers, which have been in existence. People in computer science have been studying neural networks for decades now. So it doesn't even have to be new, but anytime there's a breakthrough or a disruptive, adoption of a technology at a large scale, there is this debate going back to the 1960s when people were even questioning why are these, as they're called in this article, electronic computers, this kind of monstrosity in the world. Who needs computers, right? And Sam Altman from OpenAI has been quoted to say that, well, nobody in education will say this about calculators anymore. Initially, there was a huge problem with using calculators for mathematics. So we always see this kind of debate, and on one side, there's going to be proponents of people who want to push this innovation forward, make it open source, particularly on the computer science side. And on the other side, there are people, rightly so, who are wanting more guardrails, who are wanting to regulate this new idea, new technology. In fact, this is a timely discussion because the Biden administration just passed an executive order on artificial intelligence, recognizing that there are safety concerns. One, of course, job security. That always, in the long run, we all know that new technology and new innovation always helps in the long run. But in the midterm, there is a shakeout because some jobs or some tasks, actually, it's better to think of them in terms of tasks. Some may get replaced, some may get augmented. And so there's always this kind of a shakeout in the market initially. Then there's also some concerns about more concentration in the AI industry. Of course, in terms of players, we don't want a few big giant internet giants to control. We don't want that kind of anti-competitive tendencies, but also geographically, if you look at where are these AI jobs coming from within the US, it's not surprising that the Bay Area is driving a lot of these AI jobs, and along with some other top industries, the usual suspects in terms of cities, for instance, Austin, San Francisco, Seattle, Boston, and so on. So I think there's right reasons to be concerned. We don't want any new technology to be so out of control, whether it creates unfair practices or misinformation, which is a big problem on the internet, or even things like other types of threats. So there's already been 6 months of research. In the last 6 months, I've been tracking a ton of papers have come out looking at how generative AI impact online platforms, going back to our discussion of things like Q&A platforms, knowledge communities. And you can see very provocative research papers coming out saying, well, are language models going to be threatening digital public goods? There's another one I love. It says, can ChatGPT kill user-generated Q&A platforms? So we know that these kinds of headlines are common in both media and academic research because of some of these concerns around large language models, ChatGPT, and so on, particularly given their unprecedented growth. So these papers, what have they collectively shown? The one thing that I want to highlight here is that they look at aggregate search traffic, aggregate web traffic to platforms like Stack Overflow, and they also look at what kind of questions are there still questions and answers being posted on these platforms as they were before the takeoff point of ChatGPT last year. And so they do a pre and post analysis, and what across these research studies, what we're finding more and more in both marketing, information systems, and economics research is that indeed there is a decrease in traffic to a lot of these Q&A platforms, and also the quality of questions being asked drastically falls. So one other paper I want to highlight, and again, these are all going to be available to you through the link that I'm going to share at the end. In this paper, one other interesting finding is that in addition to Stack Overflow website being seeing reduced activity, the authors also find that they don't replicate this effect on a community like Reddit. And if you know anything about Reddit, Reddit has a much more social interaction component to it. It's not just a platform where a user goes and asks a question and comes back with an answer. It's much more about community-driven interactions. And so what they show is while on the platform Stack Overflow, there's a huge decrease in the average volume of questions in traffic. And I'm just showing you one figure from their paper. You don't find this kind of a drop after the launch of AI ChatGPT tools if you look at Reddit, which I thought was a very cool finding. Okay, so this brings me to kind of my domain, which is online learning platforms. We've talked a little bit about the big picture of AI, generative AI, the kinds of risks and opportunities it poses. Now we're going to dive deeper into one context of online learning platforms, where if you know anything about MOOCs, you might know that the engagement tends to be typically pretty low compared to some of the online degree programs. So what I'm going to show you is one research. I'm calling this study 0.0 because it's already published work, and I just want to share this with you as a precursor to sharing some of my newer work with you. And the question here is going to be, what is the effect of content sharing strategies on users' engagement with videos and assessments when they're enrolled in an online learning class? And think of this as a Coursera MOOC. That's where we partner with to do a field experiment at a very large scale. So the idea is going to be, if you tell people, hey, share something about ideas of the course versus share something about your own identity, which of these prompts will lead to more engagement overall? And this is a human-only context. Notice that so far we're not asking them to use AI. In fact, these studies were run way before, between 2016 and 19, so we didn't even have the option to ask them to use generative AI through ChatGPT and other tools. So the basic motivation for this research that drove me to study these topics was that across the board you see engagement numbers pretty low. Lots of people on social media and other platforms are lurkers, and this is particularly true in online education platforms, where people may start a course, but then no matter what course data I look at, there's a huge decline of activity within the very first week. And this pattern that I'm showing you here is from my data from a single digital marketing MOOC, but I've seen this over and over again in my research. No matter what course you take, typically if you do these kinds of self-paced online learning courses in the form of MOOCs, whether it's Coursera, edX, Udemy, what have you, you find that when somebody starts a course within the first week, they typically tend to drop out. And again, perhaps their goal was just to explore. Maybe they just wanted to see one video, and that's fine. But if you think about it from a traditional education, face-to-face learning perspective, it begs the question, is there anything we can do to help this user stick a little longer, maybe watch a couple more lectures, maybe learn something that they could have valued from? And so the idea here is, if in face-to-face classes, instructors can use things like ice-breaking activities, could they do something like that in these self-paced, on-demand kind of MOOC environments? So we know that the reach of MOOCs is large, and it's very hard to have that one-on-one person connection that you could in face-to-face learning. And we wanted to see if getting learners to share their identity with each other, know who they are, might help them engage more subsequently. So what we did is a multi-year project with Coursera. This is me at their headquarters at Mountain View in 2018. And we set up these studies that we were able to publish last year, where we nudged half of the learners at random in a large digital marketing course to share something about their ideas related to the course topic, and the other half to share something about their own identity and who they are. And this was super interesting because, contrary to our expectations, we found that the idea nudge always works. And I've talked about this research in some of my op-eds and podcasts. If you have time, I would highly encourage you to try to go and listen to some of this stuff to get a deeper view. But I'll give you the key highlight, the key finding from randomly assigning learners either to share something about course content or something about their identity. What do we find? Here I'm showing you their engagement with videos and course assessments. And in the light blue bar, which is idea sharing nudges, learners tend to complete over 30% more videos and assessments in the weeks following this intervention. So typically the course is 4-week long. And if they go through the idea sharing nudge just in the beginning of their first week of their course, they're likely to stick around more and complete more videos and assessments. On the contrary, I found no significant effects of being assigned to an identity sharing nudge, which going in, I was thinking that that's going to be, important, especially in these large scale anonymous communities. So this made me wonder, well, what is it about idea sharing nudges that results in this huge uplift in engagement? And what the text of the content that learners post showed me is that the idea sharing posts tend to be much more elaborate, much more cognitively complex, and people really put in the thought to write something of value compared to identity sharing posts, which tend to be very superficial. Okay, so that was a quick primer to what's coming next, which is, well, if we're asking learners to share this kind of content, it's not so easy for everybody to be able to write. Particularly think of non-native English speakers, maybe those whose first language is not English. And also there are tons of barriers to writing. It involves cost, effort, time, and so on. So here I thought about, well, with the advent of ChatGPT, what if we could ask learners in an online course to use generative AI tools to craft their discussion forum posts? And so the study 1.0 that I'm going to present to you now is going to take this idea of human and AI both and try to figure out, well, if humans were allowed to use AI rather than crafting the discussion forum posts themselves, how would it affect their content creation, their willingness to post more, and also how would it affect their engagement with those types of posts? Could it be that perhaps they'll post longer content or more content because it's now easier or cheaper to do so in terms of effort, but at the same time, it's not that engaging, or they may not learn or benefit much from it. Again, remember, this is an education setting where we also care about what are learners learning. So there's a huge debate, and I've been a panelist on some webinars about ethical implications of generative AI. And we also want to be careful that it's not a tool that they're using for cheating, but at the same time, we're helping them learn and develop the way to think about the process of coming up with a coherent argument. So the idea here is we give them topics every week, and they either are allowed to use generative AI or encouraged to do so, or they're not. And so what I did is I conducted field studies in online degree programs with a view to improving the learner experience and engagement. And in 4-week courses, again, on marketing, I assigned learners at random. We get about 300 to 500 students in each of these courses. And these were run pretty early in the, if you think about the timeline of ChatGPT, it kind of expanded December 2022, and many of these experiments were run February 2023 when learners didn't have prior experience with the tool, or they hadn't really figured out how to completely trick AI into giving them the answer that they need. So what we see in the results between the June and the February experiments is also actually pretty cool from the perspective of how users learn to use AI better over time. And a typical course in this study will have a 36-year-old, 68% male, on average 24% international learners. And so what we did then is, in terms of the experiment design, to see if generative AI would help or hurt learners, we basically wanted to encourage them with a very subtle nudge. Remember, this is not making anything mandatory. It's not part of an assignment that's going to give them a grade, a pass or a fail. None of those consequential things are changed here. It's a very subtle nudge simply to ask them to use generative AI for their posts in a discussion forum. And either they use AI or they don't, depending on what they're asked to do. In the second study that I'll show you in 2.0, we also then asked them to modify the content of the AI with their own human input. And the results are quite interesting, I think. So how do we do this? Just to give you some context so you understand the results when I present them to you, I want to highlight that the discussion forum posts here are not happening in Coursera. So Coursera discussion forums were part of the study 1 that study 0.0 that I showed you. Here I'm using a tool called Yellowdig, which has a lot more engagement features built in by default. So rather than a traditional Canvas or Coursera discussion forum, here the social interactions are much more like a social media platform. So learners have the ability to post rich text editor type of content. They can include links, images, videos, and then everybody else can actually react and comment below them. So I'll show you a quick video probably to show you how the interface looks in Yellowdig. And what they do really is a really good job of making the interface almost feel like a social media channel. You can post, you can comment, you can also include hashtags, and then you can, the most critical feature for us for this study is this idea of topics. Let me get to that. So these are comments. You can comment below the post, and then here you can reply to the comments also. So it's a very nice kind of threaded discussion. And if you look at this side, you can actually see the topic tags. So marketing is a topic tag that's created by the instructor. And learners, when they're making a post, can add this tag, which is important for us because we want learners in the AI and the non-AI condition to be appropriately tagged later. Okay, so what do we do in study one? The most important thing that I want to show you is what learners see. So if you're in the AI condition, you will randomly be assigned to see a prompt which gives you the topic for that week's discussion. So this is taken from a course on marketing analytics. So that week's discussion was about causality versus correlational studies. And the question that the instructor gives learners is share statements that appear causal but are actually correlational. And the question is the same for both the AI condition and the non-AI condition. But the people who are assigned to the AI condition, in addition, are asked to use tools like ChatGPT or other AI tools. Whereas those in the non-AI prompt are asked to use just their own thinking or their discussions with family and friends. So that's the main intervention. And again, they're taken to two separate tags in YellowDig so that one group cannot see the other group. Otherwise, there's also some concerns for what if the control group starts to see that the treatment or the AI group is using generative AI, and we don't want those spillovers to be able to make valid conclusions from this research design. So what do we see in terms of their posting activity? In general, we see that most learners do create a post. Typically, they make what I find is they make about 3 posts and a total of 480 words across all of their posts. We also see that most of the learners do get a comment on their posts, which is already speaking to higher level engagement than many other platforms. And at the same time, comments tend to be much shorter, about 45 words and 17 comments per post. So I want to show you some evidence on just to make sure that the study design is valid. One of the things we need to make sure is that the balance of observed demographics, who are these learners in both the AI and non-AI condition, is fundamentally very similar, because we don't want any factor other than our intervention to be driving those results. If we find that the AI group posts more content than the non-AI group, we don't want that to be driven by maybe those learners were brighter or smarter or more engaged to begin with. And to rule out any concerns for those types of selections, although we did randomize, we want to make sure that their observed demographics look very similar, which in this case they do. Both groups are about 36 years of age, 70% male, 24% international students, and so on. The other thing that you may be wondering is, well, we know it's pretty impossible to detect AI content. So even though somebody is assigned to be in the AI condition, how do we know that they really did use AI to make their post? And that's a big, big challenge, right? Because there's no really detection tools out there. So what did I do? Well, one thing I could do was look at the text of the post that they make, and presumably those in the AI condition who are encouraged to use generative AI will mention, at least some of the posts would mention the tools that they used. Particularly, remember this in February 2023, and many people, I think almost 50% of learners in the AI condition who posted did attribute some of the credit for their post to ChatGPT. So here I'm plotting the words that play the key differentiating role in the content posted in AI versus non-AI conditions. And ChatGPT turns out to be the word which has the highest keyness score, which means that indeed those in the AI condition were mentioning ChatGPT rather than those in the non-AI condition. I also surveyed the learners, one always a good check, sanity check, is just to ask them, hey, what tools did you use? And I did this right after they were introduced to the nudge to use generative AI. And most learners in the AI condition do indeed use generative AI tools. They mentioned ChatGPT. In the June session, many even mentioned Google Bard. And we also see that those in the non-AI condition don't mention AI tools in the survey, which is another sanity check to make sure there was compliance. Finally, I also checked the similarity between the text learners posted and that I could generate for each week's discussion question using ChatGPT 3.5 myself, and the similarity was much higher for those learners who were in the AI condition relative to the similarity between ChatGPT's answer for the same question and those learners' answers who were in the non-AI condition. So this gives us some face validity, some confidence, and at the same time, we don't want them to be posting about material unrelated to the course. We still want it to be very much about the similar course topics. So I also just did some word clouds to visually see that in general, both groups post about the same topics. The only difference is that the AI group is using generative AI to create and craft those posts, whereas the non-AI condition, they're not using generative AI. So with that, we have some confidence that our experiment design worked as intended, and I'm sure you're getting impatient for the results to see the final numbers. What did we learn from this study? Well, from the data that I collected from this 4-week study in February this year, what I really found is that when it comes to posting frequency, there is no difference. And post participation, which is the likelihood that a learner will ever make a post, there is no difference between AI and non-AI groups. However, if you look at the length of the post in terms of number of words, it's almost 40% more for those in the AI condition relative to those in the non-AI condition. And this is pretty intuitive. ChatGPT or other tools that they may be using makes it easy to write content. It reduces the cost of writing. However, it shouldn't really affect their propensity or their desire to make a post. The other interesting thing that I found was that even though they're posting longer content, others are engaging with that content much less, or in terms of shorter length of comments. So the engagement potential is lower in the AI condition relative to the non-AI condition. Now, one quick reaction I get when I present this finding is that, well, this is probably because the longer content is less engaging by itself. So if they're posting longer content with AI's help, it's probably less engaging for others. This is actually not true, and I rule out this explanation by looking at the relationship between length of content and engagement within each of the conditions, within AI and within non-AI, and I don't really find that kind of relationship between the two. Okay, so I want to summarize these results quickly. I know this is a lot of numbers that you're probably not used to seeing in these webinars, but quickly to drive the point home and bring our discussion on this study to a full circle, what I find is post length increases by almost 183 words, and average words, like I said, was about 490, 480. And we also see that comments received and comment lengths are both lower. So 5% less likelihood to get a comment and about 10% shorter length of comments. Now the question is, why is this? Well, more posting is easier to explain in my mind because AI reduces the effort of crafting discussion forum posts. And when I asked learners this question, hey, how easy or difficult it was for you to come up with a response, in the survey, they themselves have acknowledged that it was much more easy for them in the AI condition to come up with a response than for learners who responded to the same question in the non-AI condition. So it seems like, in general, generative AI reduces the effort involved and they're able to post longer content. The results are pretty interesting for why the AI content may be less engaging. And here I'm showing you some text analysis. I really just want to focus on 3 things: the diversity of content, the readability of content, and how personal the content is. So if you compare the means of these dimensions for AI and non-AI posts, it turns out that the AI posts tend to be very, very similar to each other on the similarity metric. So there's less diversity of content, which is something we would really encourage in online learning communities. We want to encourage debate. We want to encourage creative thinking and discussion. So we see that actually there's almost a potential negative effect in terms of reducing the diversity of content by using AI. We also find that people are using less first-person pronouns, less authenticity, and these are based on dictionary-based methods. commonly called Luke, which rates these different words on linguistic dimensions to compute scores for each of these dimensions that I'm sharing with you. And we again find that the content tends to be less personal when it's AI. So how can we mitigate this? I'm going to skip over other explanations. Those details are in the paper. My key question from this study was, if AI is really leading to low engagement, how can we mitigate this negative effect? If indeed it's being driven by some of the nature of textual content, can we nudge learners to make their AI-generated posts much more human, much more personal in some way? And so in this study, what I'm doing is I'm asking learners in a third condition, in addition to having human and AI posts, can we actually use ideas like prompt engineering to modify the posts that they generate using AI? And this really brings us to the notion of how can we use AI for the benefit of education, where we don't want learners to simply copy paste, which is a tendency in many cases. We want them to be thoughtful about it. We want them to be intentional and deliberate about it. And so that was the idea behind designing the study, where in addition to the 2 prompts that I already showed you for study 1, I have a third prompt where I'm also asking learners, can you do something to modify either your prompt to the AI or change the content that is generated by AI before you post it? And again, one of the limitations of this study is we don't exactly observe their prompting activity. So we don't see if they're using chain of thought prompting, if they're doing some creative prompt engineering. We don't observe that. We only observe the outcome, which is the content that they post in Yellowdig in response to each week's discussion topic. And so in future, I'm looking at more studies using Discord. We've actually at GEES created our own kind of AI bot, and we're testing that out with many, many different learner populations to see if a more personalized bot where we can observe how learners are interacting with the bot may actually also assist in their learning, not just content creation and engagement. Okay, so with this study, again, we made sure all the sanity checks were in place. All of the learners in all 3 conditions looked very similar in terms of their demographics, so that there was no other third confound or third variable driving these results. We wanted to make sure our intervention was the only way these learners differed in the program. And we also find, again, that even though we can't exactly see who uses AI versus not, we notice that the 4th most frequently appearing word that differentiates the AI from the non-AI condition tends to be ChatGPT. And this holds true for the mod AI versus non-AI condition too. Here, the 5th most frequent or highest in terms of its keenness scores is again ChatGPT, which means that those in the mod AI condition are also using AI tools compared to those who are not in any of the AI conditions. And again, we have similar topics across conditions. We also make sure that learners are complying. And again, there's lots of checks in the paper where I exclude the compliers and still the results hold. Okay, perfect. So my two more slides on results for this study. And the AI condition, what's really cool for me is, as a researcher, even though this is a different course at a different time, we do find that the main effects of AI relative to the non-AI condition are very consistent. In fact, they seem a little bit stronger for post-participation, which again is a likelihood of whether a learner will make a post or not, and that tends to be 18% higher than non-AI. We also find this huge effect in terms of number of words people use, 223 more words in their posts. And finally, the results for lower engagement in terms of comment received and comment length are also all negative. However, the most significant one is the likelihood to get a comment, which is about 8% less in the AI condition. And now you may be wondering, well, what did mod AI do when you modified the content learners posted themselves? So with human input, how does that look? Again, content creation is much higher relative to non-AI. So remember, all of these numbers have to be interpreted relative to the non-AI content, where again, we find that 9% higher post participation, 311 words more, 0.54 number of posts also in the mod AI condition are higher relative to non-AI. But what's interesting here is we no longer see a negative significant effect of content engagement metrics relative to non-AI. So it seems like the modification of AI, at least to some degree, it's a very small, simple nudge, but at least to some degree, we see that the negative effects on engagement don't surface that much anymore. And if this is the case, and is it because of our initial thesis, which going in, my hypothesis was that having this modification will potentially make the content more diverse, more readable, more personal in the mod AI condition relative to the AI condition. And remember, we're simply asking learners, hey, modify the content before you post it. We're not even saying modify it in a way that it's more engaging or modify it in a way that it's more personal, more human. So it's a very broad-based nudge. But even with that, it was pretty cool to see that when you look at these text analysis metrics, and I'm showing you only a subset, the paper has probably 5 pages worth of these metrics. What you see here is the similarity score drops, which means between the AI and the mod AI, they're more similar and also slightly more readable, although we have to keep in mind that many of these, the statistical significance may not be there between the AI and the mod AI condition, but there is a slight tendency to move in the direction we would expect, even with complexity, even with person pronouns and first person singular pronouns, where you see that the mod AI content becomes a little bit more human in some sense. And it tends to fall between AI and non-AI content. So potentially there's, stronger nudges out there that can be implemented. And one idea may be to actually be able to observe the way people are interacting with AI. So from all of this research that I've shown you, that I've been working on over the last few years, my key takeaways at least are, if we take the platform first perspective, so we go to a setting where historically there is an issue with low engagement, a lot of lurkers, not enough people posting. There's a lot of work done on incentivizing people to post reviews, whether it's financial incentives, social incentives. If we look at this broad domain of online platform and content creation, there's already a well-defined problem there. And then we bring to it all the tools that we can learn using both AI and human content. And what we find is simply asking the learners in online learning communities particularly to share something about their ideas about the content of the course increases subsequent engagement by over 30%. And when we start to think about how can we use generative AI tools to further augment the engagement in this setting, it's actually a kind of a surprising result for me, where we see more content creation but actually less user engagement with AI-driven content. And one way to mitigate that potentially is to be able to ask users to modify or personalize this content before just simply using it. And so those were some of my key takeaways. It's been remarkable just looking at the way people use generative AI and how it drives their different outcomes. And I think in future, I want to say something more about performance metrics too. In general, across many of these studies, we don't see performance metrics such as course grades being affected at all. I think there's one study in which I see a slight decline in course grade when people are modifying their AI use. And I don't have a very good explanation, but my intuition is that that's because perhaps the way they're allocating time to different competing opportunities within a course. So if you think about spending the time to modify AI content for crafting it and posting it versus doing some activities that are directly feeding into their grade. And this is an open challenge for many educators, many researchers, and I'm definitely a proponent of online education. And I'm really excited for all the research that's coming out at the intersection of education and AI. So here is the barcode, the QR code, QR code that I promised at the beginning. It has a copy of my slides. It has about 8 or 9 AI related papers that I didn't have time to cover today. And those will include both the papers that I've shown you about how generative AI is impacting online content, but they also include many other research papers on AI's effect on productivity and the job market, which is, labor productivity is a big, big, big topic. So hopefully you'll enjoy going through some of them, and also keeping in mind as a final parting thought that the behavior of these ChatGPT type of tools and other new large language models that are being built is very, very, very dynamic. So any research or any findings that you report or that we as researchers report, I think have to be grounded more and more in the time, the context, what models were being used. And so for most of my research, since this was very early work, it was pretty much limited to ChatGPT 3.5. But going forward, as we already know, there are new capabilities, and we would love to be able to explore them and research more. And so I want to leave at least 15 minutes of, I was asked to leave at least 10-15 minutes for Q&A. So I want to pause here, and if you guys have any questions, maybe this is the best time to go through them, or you can email me, stay in touch with me through Twitter, whichever platforms you're all on. I would love to hear from you, and hopefully we can continue this discussion. Thanks again.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Narang, for this wonderful presentation. As you mentioned, we do have a little bit under 10 minutes, so I'll just jump right into the questions. And this question, we actually received a couple of different variations to the question, but the question says, how do you see the future of generative AI evolving in learning platforms, and what potential innovations can we anticipate in this context?
This is an excellent question, and I think the future is already here. We're seeing so many new technologies being pitched to us as instructors, as educators every single day. And in terms of how the future will evolve, I think there are two things that I want to broadly talk about. One is the biggest question mark is, how is this going to affect learning? How are we going to assess learning? So even if we were to incorporate AI more and more, how do we assess student learning? How do we grade student outcomes that we know have been using generative AI? And this ties into this bigger debate. And my second point, which is who owns the content created by AI, which is a larger debate about intellectual property. But when you're trying to assess students in a classroom and assign a grade, it's even more important. And so I'm seeing innovations already happening. There's a company called Examined that is able to provide a ChatGPT type interface within their software. And as students write the prompts and get the answers from AI, on the left side of the interface, at the same time, on the right side of the interface, they can type up their own final answer. So Examined is allowing learners to use AI tools almost like you would use a calculator or Google search to inspire their thinking, get over maybe some kind of writing block, but at the same time create the final outcome, which is very much their own, while allowing, and this is the important part, while allowing the instructor to observe all of this. So I think more and more innovations in generative AI will push us towards a process-based model of learning rather than an outcome-based model of learning, where we as instructors are going to want more insight into how are our students learning. And so I think that those are just some examples of innovations in the future. But I think higher education is up for disruption now. And I think the book that I would recommend that just came out last month, it's called The Abundant University. Mike Smith at Carnegie Mellon, and I'm a huge fan of that book, so I definitely encourage checking it out for all kinds of technology-related disruptions happening in higher education.
Thank you. The next question says, could you please elaborate on what role does user feedback and iterative improvement play in refining AI-based strategies for content engagement in educational environments?
I think that's not as exploited as we would like. So if I understand your question correctly, you're thinking about user feedback in terms of how users are engaging with content currently. So in terms of likes, reactions, comments, if users are engaging more with certain content, how can we incorporate that learning? Is that the idea of the question?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, so I think that's not being exploited as much in online learning platforms as we would like to see. It's happening a lot more in more social media driven platforms, or even when you think about recommendation engines or multi-banded type of settings where you know which arm your user responded to. So if they're in a setting where they're going to respond positively to a certain article, then we personalize what they see next. So I think it's happening a lot more in many other platforms, but I haven't personally seen much in online learning platforms, and that's something I would love to see more of as well.
The next question, this is an interesting one. It says, how do ethical considerations around AI generated content differ in educational settings compared to the other sectors?
Yeah, this is a good one. Ethical considerations of AI. I think that's a very broad question and a debate we're still trying to unravel. And so in many settings, so if I think about platforms like Airbnb or Zillow or other platforms like maybe even algorithms that are geared for recruitment, hiring decisions, we would worry a lot about things like, is there algorithmic bias? Is the algorithm favoring certain types of individuals based on their identity, or perhaps due to the nature of training data it has access to? And there's been some work documenting racial bias in those types of settings. So those could be some big ethical concerns. The other ethical concerns could be around data privacy and data sharing. Now, when you start going from those settings to more of education and even health, I think the questions are slightly different because these settings are already doing a good job of regulating data sharing. You know, in education, we have FERPA, which is going to protect the students' rights, to protect the students' records at an institutional level, of course. Now, the ethical concerns here might be more from a perspective of, I don't want to dumb it down by saying cheating, but it is really like, are we just allowing students and learners to copy paste something without truly appreciating the nuances, without truly putting in the work? And so I think there's a panel discussion I was part of a couple of months ago with Penn State's ethical business committee, where we were discussing these issues. And in education, I think the challenge is, how can we use AI more transparently, more ethically? So if the instructor does allow learners to use AI for certain components of the course, how can we make it A, very transparent, and B, still meaningful? Because if it's a writing class and you're using AI to do the writing, that's not going to be helpful for anybody. But if it's a business class and you're probably trying to think about analytical thinking or solving a case study by coming up with examples and solutions and ideas, then perhaps writing is secondary to critical thinking skills in that domain. So the concerns there would be, from an ethical standpoint, just making sure learners are transparent about when and how they use AI, rather than so much about how are they being biased, I would think. And again, factually correct information. Early on, AI, large language models were more prone to hallucinating. So we want to make sure learners are also not falling for factually incorrect information.
Thank you. And we have time for just one more question. And it says, apart from your key takeaways, what lessons can professionals and organizations take from your research on generative AI's impact on content engagement to inform their future strategies?
Yeah, this is a great question. I think apart from my key takeaways, the biggest one will be whenever you design any kind of AI policy for your platform. So I'm talking to somebody who manages or runs a platform or a community. I would think that one of the key metrics to pay attention to is this kind of groupthink, very, very, very similar ideas being created over and over and over again, particularly as generative AI becomes more popular. If there is lack of diversity and debate and discussion, that to me seems like the most kind of alarming finding, where as a community moderator, you may want to moderate or pay special attention to, or even have detection tools that can look for those types of patterns in the text, in the content. And there is some cool research on echo chambers that are getting formed on communities like Reddit. And those types of tendencies are exacerbated with generative AI tools even more. And some of that reflects in my research, but I think that I don't directly study those issues in this research. So I think for platforms at large, managing those would be really critical in the future for the health of the communities, but also for what messages are we exposing people to. There's a social obligation also, in addition to just simply creating engagement for the sake of engagement. So I think I would worry about those implications much more as well.
Well, once again, thank you so much, Professor Narang. We truly appreciate the opportunity to have you present for the Ivy Exec audience. Thanks so much for a wonderful presentation and those great answers. And I would also like to thank you all for joining us today. As we mentioned in the beginning, we have recorded the session, and we will make sure to share the recording of the webinar in the coming days, so you can look forward to receiving a copy of your own in your email. And I just want to wish you all a great rest of the day and stay safe. Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.